wonderful testament to the good things that are happening here in northern Kentucky and across the Commonwealth to advocate for the sanctity of life. I want to thank Northern Kentucky Right to Life, as well as all the folks who have been working so hard behind the scenes to organize this event. It's become a seminal event in Northern Kentucky that we've grown to look forward to. And you know, I look across this room and I see people of all ages, people from all walks of life, all backgrounds, and all denominations. And the one thing, we have this common theme that unites us. We stand united in the belief that it is our job to give voice to the voiceless. Yes. To speak for those who cannot yet speak for themselves. Yes. And to stand to protect unborn life in this Commonwealth and across the nation. As a legislator, the most important role that I have is to protect the sanctity of life. Everything else that I advocate for, every liberty that I stand to protect, is predicated upon the God-given right to life from birth until natural death. Although the government doesn't give us our rights, God alone gives unalienable rights. The sanctity of life is clearly enshrined in the Constitution. Although the Supreme Court currently holds a convoluted interpretation, we know that the 14th Amendment, protection of life, applies to all persons, and that unborn babies are persons. Yes. So much of the moral decline that we have experienced in society can be attributed to the devaluation of human life. Ironically, so many of these so-called justifications for the practice of abortion are rooted in dehumanizing the unborn baby, reducing it to terminology such as fetal tissue or clump of cells or products of conception. When it's really no coincidence that Planned Parenthood founder Margaret Sanger was also heavily involved in the eugenics movement, which sought to dehumanize people on the basis of race or disability or so many of these factors of how productive that they could be in society when, you know, we know that only God can determine the value of a life. All life is worthy. And so much of the hatred and violence that we see in our society is rooted in this social Darwinistic idea that man is no different than animals. But, you know, the further we depart from God's design for his creation, from his ordained structure for the family unit, the further we imperil our future. But now is the time to push back and to make our voices heard. Here in Kentucky, we have made great progress this past legislative session with several key pro-life bills. The first of which I want to talk about is House Bill 148, which was introduced by Representative Joe Fisher. But if you would please, Representative Fisher, are you here with us today? I think I saw you earlier. Would you stand up, please, Representative Fisher? Has been so vocal and so powerful in advocating for this movement, for this pro-life movement, and he has worked hard for decades to advance pro-life legislation. Nobody has worked harder. He's a brilliant legal mind, and we're grateful for everything that he's done and continues to do. So thank you, Representative Fisher. House Bill 148, it's a trigger bill, and we call it that because it indicates that when, and I don't like to say if, I like to say when, Roe versus Wade is overturned, that we will revert back to the laws that we had in place that prohibited abortion here in Kentucky, and that's exactly what we hope to do. Another key piece of pro-life legislation is House Bill 5, which prohibits discriminatory abortions. It prohibits abortion on the basis of gender, race, or perceived disability. Because, again, previously, if you said, well, if a mother said, I don't want a little baby boy, or I don't want a little baby girl, they could choose to abort their child on that warped, twisted logic, or, heaven forbid, the perception of a disability. And again, there is nothing that indicates that we should not value all life, regardless of whether or not someone has a disability, because those folks who may be born different can contribute so much to our society in their own way, and this piece of legislation was just near and dear to my heart. Another bill, and I'm sure most of you have heard of this, is Senate Bill 9, the Heartbeat Bill, which it prohibits abortion from the detection of a heartbeat, and of course is one of the earliest protections to date. And Senate Bill 50 requires the reporting of abortion-inducing drugs, so like your RU-486 and things of that nature. You've got to report those now to the Vital Statistics Branch, and that's significant because not only were they not previously reported, but the doctor now has to advise that these medications can be reversed. So that's very significant. And again, these early chemical abortions, no matter how early, a life is still alive. So I think that this was a very important piece of legislation. And those who oppose our efforts to protect life often cite the cost of litigation and defending pro-life legislation in court. But I would pose the question: how can you put a price? How can you monetize a human life? You can't do it. And it is true that a lot of pro-life legislation here in Kentucky and across the nation does face legal challenges. And just a brief anecdote, I can tell you the night that Senate Bill 9 was signed, we were all down in the governor's office. It was very late, and it hadn't even been signed yet before the ACLU came out to file a lawsuit. I mean, it was just unbelievable how quick they were to pounce on it. And and another thing that whole experience kind of brought to mind is probably the most sobering, somber, and sad moment that I've experienced so far in the legislature. When one of these pro-life bills, I believe it was House Bill 5, was going through the committee process, I was sitting in this committee meeting, and there was a young woman who was there on behalf of the ACLU to testify against this pro-life bill and to encourage members to vote against it. And I'll never forget this moment. I looked at this young woman, and she was with child, visibly with child. We're talking 7, 8 months. She had a baby in her belly. And what did she have here on her lapel? Keep abortion legal. That's what I'm talking about, this culture of death that we found ourselves in. How can a woman who has a child in her abdomen, in her womb, and feels it kicking, how can she say keep abortion legal? So that was a very sombering moment, and it served as inspiration to me that we have to keep fighting this fight. Again, now is the time. Now is the time to fight back with a more favorable composition of the Supreme Court. And another thing I'd say, Roe versus Wade has only been in effect for 46 years. And it has been the most fiercely contested ruling in our lifetime. We can't become complacent about this and just accept it as status quo. If you think about it, we have to remember that the horrible, horrendous practice of slavery was legal for 89 years, so why are we just accepting this as status quo? We can't do that. We can and we must continue this fight until any mention of abortion is no more than a horrendous blight of our past. We can't believe, do not believe, the liberal left's lies. I was reading recently, a Pew Research poll indicated that right at 60% of Kentuckians think that abortion should be illegal in all or most cases. So, this isn't a partisan issue. This is a life issue. The momentum is on our side, and scientific advancements have come so far that it is abundantly clear, even from the earliest stages of pregnancy, that that's a life. And it's my belief and a belief that I'd say that the vast majority of everyone in this room shares, that all human life is made in the image of God. It is our sacred responsibility to do everything we can to protect it. Here in a moment, you will hear from two gentlemen, both of whom have strong records of standing to protect the unborn. Congressman Massey, who's here with us today, he set the standard for principled conservative leadership, and he's waded the mucky waters of the D.C. swamp in a way that we can all be proud of here in the 4th District. Moreover, there has never been a more pro-life governor than Governor Matt Bevin. He is unyielding in his efforts to protect the sanctity of life, and we have to show up strong in November to re-elect him. In closing, I'll leave you with this thought. As conservatives, as people of faith, and as Kentuckians, we must stand in the gap and fight back against this culture of selfishness, this culture of disposability, and this culture of death. My children, they're right there, your children, and all future generations are depending on us. Introducing a gentleman who frankly needs no introduction, but he's joining us here today, and I alluded earlier to in my remarks about how we have the most pro-life governor, I would venture to say, in the nation. Governor Bevin has done what he said he would do. Whenever he ran last time, I've been so impressed with his commitment in spite of all adversity that he's faced, not only on this issue, but on a variety of issues that are near and dear to my heart, and many of you as conservatives feel the same way as well. It's created so much greater economic growth and prosperity in this Commonwealth, but again, he has stood strong and been unyielding in his efforts and fearless to advocate for the sanctity of life. This time I'd like to introduce to you Governor Matt Bevin.